The ballroom shimmered with golden light as chandeliers sparkled above. Wealthy men and women in elegant clothes moved gracefully from table to table, their laughter echoing like music. Crystal glasses clinked, and the air was filled with the scent of expensive wine and perfume. It was the kind of gathering where appearances mattered more than truth, where power and wealth decided who deserved respect. Keanu Reeves entered quietly through the side door. He wore a simple black suit, neat but modest compared to the shining tuxedos and jeweled dresses that filled the room. He did not crave attention, but his presence still turned heads. Some smiled politely, recognizing him from the big screen. Others whispered behind raised hands, questioning why a man known for his humility and quiet ways had been invited to such a high-class event. He walked to a corner table, his steps steady but unhurried. He did not boast or try to blend in. He simply existed as he always did, calm, respectful, without a hint of arrogance. But in a room built on ego, humility looked like weakness. A group of young men at a nearby table noticed him. Their laughter grew louder as they leaned toward each other. One of them, dressed in a silk jacket with diamond cufflinks, smirked. "Look who decided to show up," he said, his voice just loud enough to carry. "Hollywood saint. Always. Pretending to be one of us, but never really belonging," the others chuckled. Another added, "He probably came just to eat free food. Doesn't he ride the subway like some ordinary man? Imagine sitting among millionaires and still acting." Poor. Their words were sharp, meant to cut. Some of the surrounding guests laughed too, though others shifted uncomfortably, willing to join the cruelty but too weak to stop it. Keanu heard every word. Da-da-da-da-da. His jaw tightened slightly, but his eyes remained calm. He had lived through deeper wounds than mocking laughter. He knew the difference between noise and truth. Still, the sting of their words pressed against his chest. Not for himself, but for the reflection of how easily people judged what they did not understand. He sat down quietly at his table, ignoring them. But the young men were not finished. One stood up, walking toward him with a glass in hand. "Mr. Reeves," he said loudly, drawing attention from the crowd, "tell us what brings you here. Surely not the company of people far above your world." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Keanu looked up, his expression unreadable. "I came because I was invited, just like you." The man smirked. "Ah, but you see, some of us belong here. You. Well, you don't exactly fit the picture." The laughter grew louder this time, sharper. Even the music from the string quartet seemed to fade, replaced by the echo of mockery. Keanu felt dozens of eyes on him, watching to see how he would respond. But instead of anger, he stood slowly, his calm presence silencing part of the room. He looked toward the grand piano that sat in the corner of the ballroom, untouched all evening. Its polished surface gleamed under the chandelier. Waiting for someone to give it life, without a word, Keanu walked toward it. Whispers followed him. Some asked what he was doing. Others scoffed, thinking it was another chance for them to laugh. He sat down at the bench, his fingers resting lightly on the keys. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering not just music but memories, stories, the pieces of himself. The young men sneered, one of them saying, "This should be good." And then Keanu began to play. The first notes were soft, gentle, almost fragile. But within seconds, the melody grew richer, fuller, a river of sound flowing through the room. It was not the polished performance of someone trying to impress. What? Was the raw expression of a soul speaking in a language beyond words. The ballroom fell silent. Laughter vanished. Glasses froze midair. Every ear turned toward the music, every heart leaning closer. There was sorrow in the notes, but also hope. There was pain, but also healing. The melody told a story that wealth could not buy, and pride could not silence. Keanu played not for them, but for the quiet truth inside him. And yet the music reached them all, one by one, heads lowered. Some eyes filled with tears. The young men who had mocked him moments before now stood frozen, their faces pale with disbelief. The music swelled, filling every corner of the grand hall. And in that moment, the man they had laughed at became the only voice that mattered. Asterisk, the final notes lingered in the air like whispers of a secret no one dared break. Keanu's hands rested still on the piano keys, his head slightly bowed. A long moment, the ballroom was silent. Chandeliers sparkled above, but all eyes were locked on him. "I love still," echoed with the melody that had filled the room. Then a quiet sound broke the silence, a single clap. It came from an older woman seated near the front, her eyes wet with tears. Another clap followed, then another, until the room was filled with applause. It was not the shallow applause of politeness, but the kind that comes from souls touched deeply. Some of the wealthy guests, embarrassed by how they had mocked him earlier, clapped with hesitation, while others clapped with sincerity, unable to hide the emotions that had welled up inside them, but not everyone. The group of young men who had laughed at him before stood stiff, their smiles gone, their pride wounded. One of them muttered under his breath, "So he can play a piano. What does that prove?" Their leader, the one with the diamond cufflinks, forced a laugh, louder than necessary. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising his glass, "let's not forget this is just entertainment. Some of us live in the real world, where power and money matter more than pretty songs." The applause softened awkwardness slipping back into the room. People shifted in their seats. Torn between admiration and the fear of siding against influence, Keanu stood slowly from the piano, his eyes calm as he looked at the man. "Money can buy many things," he said softly, his voice steady, "but it cannot buy peace inside your soul. It cannot buy respect. It cannot buy kindness." The man's face tightened, but Keanu's words cut deeper than any argument. A woman near the back, dressed in emerald silk, stood up. "Your music reminded me of my husband," she said, her voice trembling. "He passed last year. For the first time tonight, I felt close to him again. Thank you." Yes. Others nodded, some whispering their own quiet stories. The room shifted again, the atmosphere no longer golden and empty, but heavy with truth. The young men, uncomfortable with the turn of the evening, returned to their table, muttering to each other. They didn't like being overshadowed, especially not by the man they had tried to humiliate. Keanu, however, did not sit back down. He walked calmly across the ballroom and stood by the large windows, looking out at the night sky. He had not come here to prove anything, yet life had placed him in a moment where humility had spoken louder than wealth. As he gazed outside, he heard footsteps approach. It was a boy no older than 12, wearing a small suit that looked too big for him. He tugged lightly on Keanu's sleeve. "Sir," the boy said shyly, "how did you learn to play like that?" Keanu knelt down so his eyes were level with the boy's. "I learned by listening," he said gently. "It's not just to music, but to life. Every joy, every pain, every silence, it all has a rhythm. When you listen, your hands just follow." Boy's eyes shone. "I want to play like that one day." Keanu smiled. "Then promise me you'll never stop listening. To the world, to people, and most of all, to your own heart." The boy nodded firmly, as if he had been given a secret gift. But as the evening went on, the young men continued to drink and whisper among themselves. Their laughter returned, but this time it carried bitterness. One of them slammed his glass on the table and said, "He embarrassed us. We can't let that stand." Their leader leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he watched Keanu across the room. "Don't worry," he muttered. "The night isn't over. He'll learn his place." Keanu, unaware of their plotting, remained by the window, quietly observing the stars. He did not know that while he had touched hearts with music, he had also stirred envy that would soon bring conflict sharper than words. And in that glittering ballroom, filled with wealth and pride, a storm was beginning to form. The night continued, but the mood in the ballroom had shifted. The laughter that once filled the air now carried unease. Some guests whispered about Keanu's piano performance, admitting quietly how it had touched their hearts. Others avoided eye contact, ashamed of having laughed at him earlier. Yet at one table, bitterness brewed. The group of young men who had mocked him before now sat in silence, their pride bruised. Every time someone glanced toward Keanu with admiration, their anger deepened. Finally, the leader with the diamond cufflinks slammed his glass down so hard that it startled those sitting nearby. "Enough," he muttered. "Does everyone hear? Forget who we are. This is not his stage. He doesn't belong among us." Another man at the table leaned closer. "Then, what do you plan to do? He already embarrassed you. If you push him again, people will notice." The leader's eyes narrowed, his pride refusing to surrender. "Then I'll make sure he remembers his place tonight." Meanwhile, Keanu had stepped away from the crowd and walked into the quieter side of the hall, near a collection of framed art and old photographs. He had always preferred silence to noise, reflection to display. A few guests approached him, offering genuine words of gratitude. An older gentleman placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your music tonight reminded me of something we all forget, that money is not the measure of a man. Thank you, Mr. Reeves." Keanu gave a small, humble smile. "I'm glad it meant something to you. A peace never lasts long when envy lingers." As Keanu turned toward the main hall, the group of young men intercepted him. The leader stepped forward, his smirk sharp but hollow. "Well, Mr. Reeves," he said loudly, drawing attention from nearby guests, "it seems you've turned our quiet evening into a theater. Bravo. But let's be clear, you may impress with a song. But in this room, respect is earned differently." Some guests turned their heads, curious to see what would happen. Whispers spread quickly, and once again, all eyes were on Keanu. Keanu remained calm, his voice even. "Respect is not taken, it is given. And it is given when kindness is shown, not pride." The man laughed bitterly. "Kindness, is that what you call it?
Wow.
Playing a sad little tune and expecting the world to bow? Let's be honest, without fame, you'd just be another man in the corner. No one here would care." The words hung heavy in the air. Some nodded nervously, unwilling to anger wealth and power. Others frowned, their conscience stirred by the cruelty. Keanu looked around the room, his eyes soft but steady. "If what I did tonight only reminded one person of love they lost, or gave one child hope for tomorrow, then it mattered, even if the rest of you forget by morning." His words struck the room like a quiet storm. Silence fell again, but the leader's pride burned hotter. He stepped closer, his voice sharper now. "You speak as if you are above us. But let's test your humility, Mr. Reeves. Let's see how much courage lies behind your gentle words." He snapped his fingers, and a servant rushed forward, carrying a silver tray with 2 glasses of dark liquid. "A little game," the man said, his grin cruel. "One glass is safe, the other is not so pleasant. Drink and show us how brave you really are." Gasps filled the room. Many were shocked. Some whispered for him to stop, but pride in cruelty drowned reason. Keanu's eyes lowered to the glasses. He could feel the tension pressing down on him, the eyes waiting to see what he would do. But he did not flinch. He did not tremble. Instead, he lifted his gaze back to the man and said quietly, "True courage is not proven by foolish games. It is proven by how we treat others when we have the power to humiliate or to help. Tonight, you had that choice, and you chose humiliation." The man's smile faltered, but he masked it with a loud laugh. "So, you refuse? Perhaps the great Keanu Reeves is not so brave after all." A voice suddenly cut through the tension. It was the woman in emerald silk, the one who had spoken earlier about her husband. She stood tall, her eyes fierce. "Enough," she said. "You shame yourself, not him. He has shown more courage tonight than you will ever know." Others began to murmur in agreement. The tide in the room was shifting. The man with the cufflinks clenched his jaw, realizing his power over the room was slipping. His pride would not let him walk away. But his eyes flickered with something darker, promise that this humiliation would not be forgotten. Keanu felt it too. The night was not finished. And somewhere in the shadows of pride and envy, another storm was waiting. The ballroom air felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Some guests avoided looking at Keanu, afraid of being drawn into the conflict, while others stared with quiet admiration, moved by his calmness. The young men, however, burned with anger, their leader's pride wounded before the entire crowd. The man with the diamond cufflinks stepped closer, his voice sharp. You think you can walk into our world, play a tune, and lecture us about kindness? But this is not your stage. This is ours. And we don't forget insults. Keanu did not move. His face remained calm, his voice steady. An insult only hurts when there is truth in it. I have no insult for you. Only a reminder that pride without respect leaves a man empty. The man's eyes darkened. For a brief moment, his mask of arrogance slipped, revealing the insecurity underneath. But pride returned quickly, and he laughed loudly, trying to regain control. Words, Mr. Reeves. Just words. Let's see how long your calm lasts. He signaled to one of his companions, who quickly stood up and whispered something to the staff. Moments later, the music stopped, and the lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly. A hush fell across the guests. Confusion rippled through the crowd. As waiters moved nervously along the sides of the room, unsure of what was happening, then the man raised his glass high. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we will test humility. Mr. Reeves wishes to teach us all about respect, then let him earn it. Two servants brought forward a small stage prop and antique piano bench, worn and unstable. Placed in the center of the room, the man smirked. If you are as calm and wise as you pretend, sit here and play again for us all. Play not from comfort, but from imbalance. Let us see if your peace still holds when the ground beneath you shakes. Whispers filled the room, some were outraged at the cruelty, others too entertained to stop it. Keanu looked at the bench. It wobbled with every touch. Playing on it would not only be humiliating, but dangerous. Yet his expression remained unchanged. Slowly, he walked forward. If this is what you need to see, he said softly, then I will sit. Lowered himself onto the unsteady bench, his hands finding the piano keys once more. The wood creaked beneath him, threatening to collapse. But then his fingers moved, and the first notes rose into the air. The melody was different this time. It was sharper, stronger, like a heart beating through struggle. The bench wobbled, the piano shook, but his hands never faltered. Each note carried defiance, not of anger, but of dignity. Guests leaned forward, their breaths caught. The wealthy man's smirk faded as the music grew louder, richer, filling the hall with strength that could not be broken, and then it happened. The bench snapped beneath Keanu. Gasps filled the room as he fell back. But before anyone could react, he caught himself on the edge of the piano. Steadying his body, and without missing a beat, he kept playing. The sight stunned everyone. His back straight, his hands steady, his music unbroken, even as the ground gave way beneath him. A woman in the front row covered her mouth, tears in her eyes. He doesn't stop, she whispered. He refuses to stop. The song rose higher, more powerful, carrying a message without words. Dignity is not destroyed by humiliation, and peace is not taken by force. By the time the final note rang out, the entire room was on its feet. Applause thundered through the ballroom, drowning out every cruel laugh that had filled it earlier. Keanu stood, brushing dust from his suit, his face calm. The man with the cufflinks was pale, his pride shattered, his power over the room slipping away. But as Keanu stepped back from the piano, he saw something in the man's eyes. Not surrender, not acceptance, something darker. Resentment, a quiet, burning hatred that whispered of revenge beyond this night. Keanu knew the conflict was far from over. The applause still echoed through the ballroom as Keanu stepped back from the piano, gave a small bow, humble as always, and turned toward the crowd. Many of the guests looked at him with new respect, some even with admiration. Yet among them sat the group of young men, silent and bitter. Their leader's jaw was tight. His pride cut deeper than the broken bench on the stage. The man with the diamond cufflinks forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Well played," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "Remember, this is not a theater. This is a gathering of power, and power does not applaud songs, it demands loyalty." The words rolled across the room like poison. Some guests grew uneasy, sensing the danger beneath them. Others tried to act as if nothing was wrong, sipping their wine and avoiding the tension. Keanu, however, did not step back. His calm voice carried across the hall. True power does not demand loyalty. It inspires it. And it inspires it not with fear, but with respect. The man's smile dropped. Rage flickered in his eyes. He leaned closer. His words a whisper meant only for Keanu, but sharp enough to cut. You made me a fool tonight. No one embarrasses me and walks away unscarred. Before Keanu could respond, the man turned sharply, raising his glass toward. The crowd to the evening, he shouted, masking his anger with forced cheer. The music resumed, conversations picked up again, and the event moved forward, but underneath it all, a darker current flowed. Keanu excused himself from the center of the hall and stepped outside onto the terrace. The cool night air wrapped around him, and he breathed deeply, grounding himself. But he was not alone. A voice came from behind. You shouldn't have humiliated him. Keanu turned. It was one of the other young men, his expression tense. He glanced around nervously before continuing. He's not the type to let things go. He holds grudges, and he has friends in places you don't want to imagine. Keanu studied him quietly. Why warn me? The man hesitated. 'Cause tonight, when you played, something inside me changed. I saw my mother's face. I remembered who I was before I got pulled into his circle. I want to see blood spilled because of pride. Keanu nodded slowly, his voice soft. Then walk away from him before it destroys you too. The man lowered his gaze, shame flickering across his face before slipping back into the hall. Keanu stayed on the terrace, his eyes lifting to the stars. But soon the sound of footsteps approached again, heavier, sharper. He turned to see the leader himself, the man with the diamond cufflinks, his face twisted with anger, 2 bodyguards trailing close behind. Did you think the night was over? The man hissed, stepping closer. You embarrassed me. In front of them all? You made me look weak. I can't let that stand. Keanu straightened, his voice calm but firm. You make yourself weak by chasing humiliation instead of truth. I have nothing to prove to you. The man's smile was cold. Then, perhaps you'll prove it when you're broken. He snapped his fingers, and the 2 bodyguards moved forward. The terrace fell silent. The city lights flickering in the distance. Keanu's hand stayed loose at his sides, his body calm. He had no anger, no hatred, but he would not allow cruelty. To win, the first guard lunged, but Keanu shifted smoothly, stepping aside and letting the man stumble forward. The second swung at him, but Keanu blocked with precise movements, not striking to harm, only to defend. His calmness unsettled them, his composure stronger than their force. Guests inside began to notice the commotion. Gasps rising as faces pressed against the glass doors, whispers spread quickly. Some ran to get help. Others froze in shock. The man with the cufflinks stood back, watching with fury. Do you see? He shouted. Pretends to be calm, but in truth, he's nothing but a fighter, no better than the rest of us. But what the guests saw was different. They saw Keanu defending himself without rage, controlling the fight without cruelty, standing firm without pride. Every move spoke of restraint, of strength rooted not in ego, but in peace. Finally, Keanu disarmed one of the guards, sending him stumbling to the ground, while the other backed away, shaken. The terrace grew quiet again. Keanu turned to the leader, his voice steady. Violence does not make you strong. It only shows your fear. If you want respect, stop demanding it and start earning it. The man's face turned red with rage. But before he could reply, security staff from the event rushed onto the terrace. Pulling the bodyguards away and escorting the man back inside, the guests who had witnessed it all whispered among themselves. Many realizing the truth Keanu had shown them. Respect could not be bought, and strength was not measured in wealth or intimidation. As Keanu stood alone on the terrace once more, he felt the weight of the night settle on his shoulders. He had defended himself. Yes, but he knew. The man's hatred was not finished. Pride this wounded would not heal easily and deep inside. Keanu understood that the true test was still ahead. The ballroom carried on with forced laughter. But the night had already changed. Whispers followed Keanu wherever he walked. Some called him brave, Others called him foolish. But no one could deny that he had shown a strength money could not buy outside. The terrace was now guarded, but Keanu knew this was not the end. The man with the diamond cufflinks had left with fury in his eyes, his pride shattered before the wealthy crowd. Humiliation this deep was not easily forgotten. Keanu stayed calm, speaking kindly to guests who approached him with gratitude. 1. Woman told him his music had reminded her of her late mother. A man admitted that he had never felt so moved in his life. Keanu listened with humility, nodding, giving his full attention. But then the lights flickered, and a murmur spread across the hall. The front doors swung open, and in stormed the man with the cufflinks. Again this time without disguise, without charm. His face was twisted, his pride burning into rage. "You will not leave this place as a hero," shouted, his voice echoing. "Across the ballroom, will not be mocked by you, not in front of them." Security rushed forward, but he raised his hand. "Stay back. This is between me and him." The crowd gasped, frozen in silence. Keanu stepped forward slowly, his expression calm, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "This was never about me," Keanu said. "It was about you, about the fear inside you that makes you believe cruelty is strength. But strength is not found in humiliation. It is found in humility." The man's chest heaved, his fists clenched. For a moment it seemed he might strike again, but the crowd was no longer on his side. Murmurs rose, voices speaking against him. "Enough," one guest said. Another added, "We've followed pride too long," whispered a third. The room began to shift, the tide turning against the man who once ruled it with arrogance. His face twisted with disbelief as the same people who had laughed with him earlier now looked at him with shame. Keanu stepped closer, his eyes steady. "You don't need their fear," he said softly. "You can choose another way. You can still change." For a second the man's eyes flickered with something doubt, pain, maybe even longing. But pride was a heavy chain, and he shook his lies. Head violently pushing away the truth, security moved in, this time not hesitating. They escorted him out, his shouts echoing until the doors closed and silence filled the hall once more. The guests stood together, shaken by what they had seen. Then, slowly, they began to applaud. Not for wealth, not for power, but for dignity. Applause rose higher and higher until it filled the entire hall. Keanu bowed his head slightly, humble as always. "Thank you," he said softly. "But remember this. Night is not about me, it is about you. What will you choose when pride calls you to cruelty and fear calls you to silence? Will you choose kindness? Will you choose respect?" The room fell quiet again, every soul touched by his words. Some wiped away tears, others stood straighter, as if the weight of his question had given them courage to live differently later that night. As Keanu walked out into the cool air, the stars above shone bright. He had not come to prove anything, but he had left behind a lesson no one in that room would forget, because respect is not built on money. Power is not built on fear. And kindness, though quiet, is the strongest voice of all. He walked into the night, his steps steady, knowing. He had left more than music behind. He had left a reminder that true greatness is not in how high we stand above others, but in how deeply we lift them up.